Autopilot podcasts. Right now, as you listen to this, AI is erasing roughly 16,000 net jobs every single month in the United States. That's not a projection. That's not a fear. That's what Goldman Sachs reported in April 2026. And yet, the headline number that researchers keep coming back to is actually positive. So today, we're cutting through the noise on AI and the future of work. We're going to break down what's actually happening to jobs right now, which workers are most exposed, and what the data tells us about where this is all heading. By the end of this episode, you'll have a clearer picture of the real stakes and what it means for you. Joining me is someone who's been deep in this research, so let's get right into it. Give me the honest version. Is AI actually destroying jobs, or is that just a headline?
So the honest version is, it's complicated, and the way the question is framed almost always leads people to the wrong answer. The real story isn't about jobs disappearing wholesale, it's about tasks disappearing inside jobs. Yale economist Pasquale Restrepo, who's done some of the most rigorous work on this, makes a really important distinction. New technologies typically substitute for specific tasks within jobs, not entire occupations at once. Workers then shift toward other tasks that remain harder to automate.
So it's more surgical than people think?
Exactly. And that framing matters a lot because when you look at the data through that lens, the picture changes. A Harvard Business School study published in March 2026 analyzed nearly all U.S. job postings from 2019 through early 2025. What they found was that openings for routine, automation-prone roles fell 13% after ChatGPT launched, but demand for more analytical, technical, and creative jobs grew 20%. So the market isn't shrinking uniformly, it's reshaping.
Wait, so creative and analytical jobs actually grew?
By 20%, yeah. And that Harvard Business School research puts it plainly, generative AI is reshaping, not uniformly erasing white-collar work. The study argues that what firms choose to do, whether they use AI as an augmentation tool or a replacement tool, will determine whether workers face displacement or new opportunity.
That's a really important distinction. Augmentation versus replacement. Can you unpack that a bit more?
Sure. Augmentation means AI makes you better at your job. It handles the tedious parts so you can focus on the higher value stuff. Replacement means AI does your job instead of you. And here's what's actually interesting about where companies are right now. According to S&P Global's June 2026 report, when you look at enterprise AI objectives, 64% of companies prioritize process efficiency, 59% prioritize employee productivity, but only 24% list headcount reduction as a goal.
Only 24%? That's way lower than I would have guessed.
Right? And that's the S&P Global finding from their Purchasing Managers Index survey. Job cuts, they say, are a secondary consequence of AI investment, not the primary objective. Companies are mostly trying to do more with the same people, not fewer people.
So the layoffs we keep hearing about, those are kind of a byproduct, not the plan.
That's the data, yeah. But, and this is a big but, the byproduct is still real. S&P Global's latest survey shows a global net employment impact of negative 5 percentage points over the past 12 months. That's the percentage of businesses increasing their workforce due to AI adoption minus those decreasing it. And they're forecasting another negative 2 points in the coming year. So the direction has shifted. In 2025, S&P Global characterized AI's employment effect as neutral to slightly positive. Now it's turned modestly negative.
So we've crossed the threshold.
It looks that way. And the Goldman Sachs numbers from April 2026 make it concrete. AI substitution is wiping out about 25,000 jobs per month in the US. AI augmentation is adding back about 9,000. The net loss is 16,000 jobs per month. Over a year, that's nearly 200,000 positions.
200,000 positions a year. That's not abstract anymore.
No, it's not. And we can see it in specific sectors. The World Data's 2026 analysis documented nearly 78,000 AI-attributed tech job losses in just the first 6 months of 2025. And there's a really striking data point. Employment for software developers aged 22 to 25 dropped 20% compared to their late 2022 peak. So it's not just factory workers or call center agents. It's hitting people who thought they were in safe technical careers.
That's a gut punch for anyone who went into software development thinking it was future-proof.
And Anthropic published research in March 2026 that adds another layer to this. They introduced a new measure of AI displacement risk called observed exposure, combining what AI is theoretically capable of with what it's actually being used for in the real world. Their finding? There's no systematic increase in unemployment for highly exposed workers yet. But, and this is the part that should make younger workers pay attention, they found suggestive evidence that hiring of younger workers has specifically slowed in AI-exposed occupations.
So it's not that people are getting fired, it's that the door is closing on the way in.
That's a really good way to put it. The entry-level pipeline is narrowing, and that has long-term consequences that don't show up in unemployment statistics right away.
Okay, so let's zoom out to the global picture, because I know there are some big numbers floating around the World Economic Forum projections. What do those actually say?
So the World Economic Forum's Future of Jobs report, which surveyed over 1,000 companies representing 14 million workers across 55 economies, projects that 92 million jobs globally will be displaced by 2030, but 170 million new roles will emerge. Net positive, 78 million new jobs.
Okay, so on paper, that sounds great. Net positive 78 million jobs.
On paper, yes. But here's where I think the headline number is actually misleading, and this is the thing that keeps researchers up at night. The jobs being destroyed and the jobs being created are not the same jobs. They don't require the same skills, they don't pay the same wages, and they're not in the same places.
Right, like the net math works out, but the individual human experience doesn't.
Exactly. The World Data Analysis put it really vividly. A postal clerk in Ohio whose role is automated by intelligent mail sorting systems does not automatically transition to becoming an AI prompt engineer in San Francisco. And the gap between those two realities is where the genuine human cost of AI displacement actually lives in 2026.
That image really lands. It's not a math problem, it's a geography and skills problem.
And a timing problem. The WEF also found that 59% of the global workforce will need reskilling by 2030. That's a massive undertaking. McKinsey estimates that 14% of the global workforce may be forced to change careers entirely by 2030. These aren't small adjustments.
59% needing reskilling. That's more than half the workforce.
More than half. And here's where the research gets really interesting. A comparative study across 55 countries published in 2025 found that the strongest predictor of whether a country successfully adapts its workforce to AI is organizational AI exposure. Countries and companies where AI is already widely adopted at the firm level are actually better at developing workforce strategies. But, and this is counterintuitive, larger skills gaps are associated with lower adoption of AI workforce strategies. So the places that need adaptation most are the least equipped to do it.
That's a vicious cycle.
It really is. And it's why the AEI and Brookings Institution, in a joint report with Harvard Kennedy School, argued that the framing of AI as a replacement technology is itself part of the problem. Eric Brynjolfsson, one of the report's authors, argues that true technological progress lies in augmenting human capabilities, not replacing them. He actually criticizes the current trend of building AI that substitutes for human labor, saying there are misaligned incentives among technologists, entrepreneurs, and policymakers.
So even some of the people building this stuff think the direction is wrong.
That's Brynjolfsson's argument, yeah. He points to companies like Cresta as examples of doing it right, using AI to assist human operators rather than replace them. The technology exists to go either way. It's a choice.
That's a really important point. It's not inevitable, it's a design decision.
And Restrepo and Acemoglu's research adds a really sobering economic dimension to this. Their work, forthcoming in the Quarterly Journal of Economics, shows that automation often specifically targets tasks that pay workers wages above their outside options, what economists call wage rents. When those tasks get automated, those wage premiums disappear, and that amplifies wage losses and contributes to rising inequality. So it's not just about job counts, it's about what happens to the quality and compensation of the jobs that remain.
So AI could be making the jobs that survive worse paying, not just fewer.
That's what the research suggests. And the Wall Street Journal highlighted this work specifically in the context of how AI may further tilt economic rewards toward companies and shareholders rather than workers. It's a distributional question as much as an employment question.
Okay, I want to push back a little here because there's also a counter-narrative that says we've been through this before. Every industrial revolution, every wave of automation, and the economy always finds new work. Is that just wishful thinking?
It's not wishful thinking, but it's also not a guarantee. The AEI report makes this point. Experts and the media tend to overestimate technology's negative impact on employment. McKinsey Global Institute actually reversed some of its earlier AI forecasts, and Anthropic's research notes that a prominent earlier attempt to measure job vulnerability from offshoring identified roughly a quarter of U.S. jobs as at risk, but a decade later, most of those jobs had healthy employment growth.
So the doom predictions have a bad track record.
Historically, yes. But Restrepo's framework is useful here. He says the economic consequences of new technologies depend on a race between two forces: machines replacing workers in existing tasks and the creation of new tasks that sustain demand for human labor. The question is whether new task creation keeps pace. And with AI, that race is happening faster than any previous wave of automation.
And there's also the question of what happens if AI gets really, really good. Like, not just automating tasks, but potentially doing everything.
Yeah, Restrepo actually has a paper on exactly that. It's called We Won't Be Missed: Work and Growth in the AGI World. He considers an economy where highly capable AI systems can perform nearly any task. And his conclusion is striking. In that scenario, the key constraint on economic growth would no longer be human labor. It would be computing power, the hardware required to run those systems.
So in the extreme scenario, the bottleneck shifts from people to chips.
That's the speculative frontier. We're not there. But it's worth knowing that serious economists are already thinking through those scenarios.
Let's bring it back to what's happening right now, because I think there's a practical question here. The S&P Global report said only 37% of AI initiatives are actually live and delivering value. So is the disruption even as advanced as the headlines suggest?
That's a really important reality check. S&P Global found that only 46% of AI initiatives launched in the past year are on track to achieve positive ROI within 12 months, and only 37% are assessed as live and delivering value. So the technology may be advancing faster than organizations can reliably deploy it.
So there's a gap between the hype and the actual deployment.
A significant one. And S&P Global also found that only 22% of AI projects target a fully autonomous end state. The vast majority are still augmentative, AI helping humans, not replacing them. Across 38 AI use cases they tracked, the most widely adopted are things like summarization at 71%, translation at 62%, and data management at 61%. These are tools that make workers more efficient, not tools that eliminate the worker.
So the robot apocalypse is, at least for now, mostly a robot assistant.
For now. But the SRM 2025 Automation and AI Survey, which covered over 20,000 US workers, found that at least 50% of tasks are already automated in about 15% of US employment. That's roughly 23 million American jobs where automation has already crossed the majority threshold. So it's not nothing.
23 million jobs where more than half the tasks are already automated. That's a lot of people whose work has fundamentally changed.
And another 12 million workers are using generative AI for more than half their tasks. So the transformation is already underway, it's just uneven. Some sectors and some roles are feeling it intensely. Others haven't been touched yet.
Which sectors are feeling it most right now?
The Bureau of Labor Statistics flagged several occupational groups as particularly susceptible. Legal work like paralegals and lawyers, financial roles like credit analysts and budget analysts, and technical roles like claims adjusters and insurance appraisers. But also, interestingly, software developers and database architects, which surprises people because those feel like tech-forward jobs.
Right, you'd think the tech people would be safe.
The BLS is careful to note that it's not a death sentence for those roles. Software developers may actually be needed to build and maintain AI systems. But the nature of the work is changing. And the entry-level coding tasks that used to be how junior developers built their skills, a lot of those are being absorbed by AI tools.
So the career ladder is getting its lower rungs removed.
That's a really apt way to put it. And it connects back to what Anthropic found, the slowing of hiring for younger workers in AI-exposed occupations. If you can't get the entry-level job, you can't build toward the senior role. That's a structural problem that doesn't show up in aggregate unemployment numbers.
So what does the research say people should actually do? Like, what's the actionable takeaway for someone who's worried about their career?
The AEI and Brookings report points to a few things that have real evidence behind them. Flexible work arrangements, technical recertification, and creative apprenticeship models that offer real-time learning and adaptable skills development. The key word there is adaptable, not just learning one new skill, but building the capacity to keep learning.
So it's less about learning a specific tool and more about becoming someone who can learn tools?
Exactly. And the Harvard Business School research makes a point that I think is really empowering. It says firms' choices around reskilling and integrating AI as an augmentation tool will determine whether workers face displacement or new opportunity. That means the outcome isn't fixed. It depends on decisions being made right now by companies and by workers.
That's actually kind of hopeful. It's not a done deal.
It's not. And the AEI report also makes an interesting argument about labor unions, that instead of fighting automation, unions in the US should work with employers to support firm automation while simultaneously advocating for worker skill development. They point to Germany as a model where strong worker representation and firm automation coexist productively.
The Germany model. That's interesting because the US conversation tends to frame it as workers versus technology, not workers and technology.
And that framing itself might be part of the problem. If workers and companies are adversarial about AI adoption, you get worse outcomes for everyone. If they're collaborative, if the goal is using AI to make workers more productive and then sharing those productivity gains, you get a very different picture.
So the technology isn't the variable, the relationship between workers and employers is the variable.
That's what the research keeps pointing back to. The comparative study across 55 countries found that ecosystem-based approaches, where government, employers, and education providers collaborate, produce the best workforce adaptation outcomes. No single actor can solve this alone.
Okay, so when you step back from all of this, the Goldman Sachs numbers, the WEF projections, the Anthropic research, the Restrepo and Acemoglu work on wages, what does it actually add up to?
Here's what I think this really comes down to. The aggregate story is cautiously optimistic, more jobs created than destroyed, AI mostly augmenting rather than replacing, deployment slower than the hype suggests. But the individual story is much harder. The transition is painful, uneven, and concentrated among specific groups: younger workers, workers in routine roles, workers in places that don't have access to the new jobs being created.
The math works out, the people don't automatically.
Exactly. And the wage inequality piece from Restrepo and Ashimoglu is the part that I think gets underreported. Even if total employment stays stable, if AI systematically targets the tasks that pay workers above market wages, you end up with more jobs, but worse jobs for a lot of people. That's a real risk that the net job creation numbers don't capture.
So the question isn't just will there be jobs, it's will those jobs be good?
That's the right question. And the answer depends on choices by companies about how they deploy AI, by policymakers about how they support reskilling, and by workers about how they position themselves. The research is pretty clear that augmentation beats replacement as a strategy for productivity, for worker outcomes, and honestly for long-term business performance too.
And the S&P Global data backs that up. Companies aren't even primarily trying to cut headcount. They're trying to get more out of the people they have.
Right. 64% prioritizing process efficiency, 59% prioritizing employee productivity, versus only 24% targeting headcount reduction. The dominant corporate strategy right now is actually aligned with augmentation. The risk is that the side effects, those 16,000 net jobs lost per month, accumulate into something much larger if the reskilling infrastructure doesn't keep pace.
And 59% of the workforce needing reskilling by 2030 is a massive infrastructure challenge.
Massive. And the comparative study found that skills gaps actually impede adaptation rather than accelerate it. So the places and people who most need to reskill are the least likely to have the resources to do it. That's the policy gap that needs to close.
Here's what this really comes down to, I think. We started this episode with that number, 16,000 net jobs lost per month in the US. And that's real. But the fuller picture is that AI is less a wrecking ball and more a reshaper. It's changing what work looks like faster than it's eliminating work entirely.
And the reshaping is what demands attention. Because reshaping still requires people to move, to learn new things, to enter new fields, to sometimes relocate or retrain. And that movement has a cost that falls unevenly. The workers who can adapt quickly, who have access to reskilling, who are in industries where augmentation is the norm, they're going to be fine. The workers who can't make that move are the ones who need policy support right now, not in 2030.
So the window to act is now, not when the disruption becomes undeniable.
Anthropic's research actually makes this point directly. Their framework is most useful when the effects are ambiguous, because it can help identify the most vulnerable jobs before displacement is visible. Waiting for the crisis to be obvious means waiting too long.
And for anyone listening who's thinking about their own career, the Harvard Business School research gives a pretty clear signal. Routine, automation-prone roles are contracting. Analytical, technical, and creative roles are growing. The direction of travel is not ambiguous.
And the good news is that the skills that make you harder to automate, judgment, creativity, the ability to work with ambiguous problems, are also the skills that make you more valuable as AI handles more of the routine load. The workers who learn to use AI as a tool rather than fear it as a threat are the ones who are going to come out ahead.
We started this episode with AI cutting 16,000 jobs a month. And we're ending with this. The net is positive, the transition is not, and the outcome is still being written. That's not a comfortable answer, but it's the honest one. Thanks for listening to Copilot Podcasts. The next time you hear someone say AI is either going to save us or destroy us, you now know it's doing something more complicated and more human than either of those.